Mesopotamia before the rise of the great empires. A Tales of Cush feature. A note on sources. This piece draws on both the Hebrew canon and extra-biblical tradition, primarily the Book of Jubilees, which is preserved as scripture within the Ethiopian Orthodox biblical canon, though it is considered apocryphal or pseudepigraphal in the Jewish and most Christian canons. Where Jubilees supplies detail that Genesis omits, motives, genealogies, place names, timelines, that material is flagged clearly as coming from Jubilees, not from the Torah itself. Given this newsletter's focus on Cushite history and the traditions that preserve it, these accounts are treated here as valuable historical memory worth taking seriously, not as equivalent in authority to the biblical text, but not apologized for either.
The cradle, the geography of Genesis. Before Mesopotamia was a land of ironclad armies and sprawling empires, it was simply the land between the rivers. The Greek word Mesopotamia translates the Hebrew geographical concept of Aram-Naharaim, Aram of the two rivers, and the ancient plain of Shinar, Sumer. In the biblical narrative, this region is not just a setting, it is a literal staging ground for the human race. The Edenic rivers. Genesis 2 verse 14 names the Tigris, Hiddekel, and the Euphrates as two of the four rivers splitting from the Garden of Eden. The post-flood descent, after the ark ground on the mountains of Ararat, Urartu, directly north of the Mesopotamian valley. Humanity migrates south. Genesis 11 verse 2 states they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there, the historical reality. This mirrors the archaeological record. Around 5000 to 3100 BCE, the Ubaid and Uruk periods. Early populations migrated from the northern Zagros foothills down into the marshy, fertile southern floodplains of the Tigris and Euphrates. There they developed systemic irrigation, drained the swamps, and laid the foundations of urban civilization.
The imperial spark, the rise of Nimrod. In Genesis 10, the loose tribal networks of the post-flood world are disrupted by a single figure, Nimrod, who represents the emergence of centralized, autocratic power in human history. The biblical text, Genesis 10 verses 8 to 10, Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man, Gibber. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. The historical parallels. Nimrod's kingdom list maps onto the historical Akkadian Empire, circa 2334 to 2154 BCE. Erech is Uruk, the city associated with King Gilgamesh. Akkad is Akkad, the capital of Sargon of Akkad, one of the earliest rulers on record to unify independent city-states into a single empire, the paradigm shift. Nimrod represents a shift from agrarian clans toward an imperial state, building cities with the explicit intent of projecting military and political power. The text notes his influence expanding northward into Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Genesis 10 verse 11.
The monumental pride, the Tower of Babel. With centralization came architectural ambition. Under the cultural umbrella of Nimrod's Mesopotamian expansion, humanity sought to build a centralized urban monument. The Genesis account, Genesis 11, describes the construction of a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, meant to prevent humanity from scattering. God judges this by confusing their languages, forcing the abandonment of the city of Babel. The archaeological blueprint. The tower is widely understood as a description of a ziggurat, the massive, stepped mud-brick temple towers that dominated the Mesopotamian skyline, built as a symbolic point of contact between priesthood and state deities such as Marduk or Enu, according to the Book of Jubilees. Non-canonical Jubilees 10 adds substantial detail not found in Genesis. It states construction lasted 43 years, and describes the builders using fire-baked bricks and imported natural bitumen, asphalt, from the Euphrates Valley as mortar. Jubilees frames the tower as more than an act of engineering pride. It casts it as an attempt at spiritual confrontation with the divine realm. This detail comes entirely from Jubilees. Genesis itself makes no such claim.
The controversial division, Peleg and Asherad. The collapse of the Tower of Babel didn't just scatter humanity. In extra-biblical tradition, it also produced one of the most startling genealogical claims linking the line of the patriarchs to the family of Mesopotamia's first tyrant. Peleg in the fractured world, Genesis 10 verse 25 notes, one was named Peleg, because in his time the earth was divided. Ancient Near Eastern interpretive traditions generally read this as a fragmentation of the Mesopotamian monoculture into distinct nations and language groups, rather than a geological event. According to the Book of Jubilees, non-canonical Jubilees 8:7 makes a genealogical claim absent from Genesis entirely, that Eber, great-grandson of Shem, and namesake of the Hebrews, took a wife named Asherad, described as the daughter of Nimrod. Their son, in this account, was Peleg. A speculative reading. Genesis and mainstream tradition are silent on why such a union would occur if the Jubilees account is taken seriously. One plausible reading, offered here as informed speculation, not established history, is that it reflects some form of political or marital alliance between Nimrod's expanding Mesopotamian power base and the independent nomadic Semitic clans represented by Eber's line. This remains a tradition preserved only in Jubilees. It should be read as such, not as a documented historical event.
The rebels escape, Abraham leaving the bureaucracy of yore. Centuries after Peleg, southern Mesopotamia had evolved into a dense, bureaucratic, polytheistic urban culture. It is from this landscape that God calls Abraham, demanding a break from the Mesopotamian worldview. The history of Ur, Genesis 11 verse 31 states Abraham grew up in Ur of the Chaldeans. This aligns roughly with the Ur III period, circa 2112 to 2004 BCE, when Ur was a major, bureaucratic metropolis dominated by the great ziggurat of Ur, dedicated to the moon god Nana, a society built on legal codes, long-distance trade, and astronomical observation according to the Book of Jubilees. Non-canonical Jubilees 11 to 12 provides a dramatic backstory absent from Genesis. It describes Ur as steeped in idolatry and astrology under a ruling figure named Ur, son of Cushite, and portrays Abraham as a young dissenter who secretly destroys his father Terah's household idols and burns the city's pagan temple, escaping in the chaos as his brother Haran dies attempting to save the idols. None of this appears in the Genesis text, which simply records the family's departure from Ur. 3. The migration route. Abraham's family migrates northwest along the Euphrates to Haran in northern Mesopotamia, a route consistent with well-attested ancient trade corridors used by Amorite groups in the early 2nd millennium BCE.
The first Eastern invasion, the Battle of the Five Kings. In Genesis 14, Mesopotamia moves from background setting to active military force in Canaan, the first international conflict recorded in Scripture. The Mesopotamian coalition, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, leads an alliance with three other eastern rulers, Amraphel of Shinar, Arioch of Elasar, and Tidal of Goyim, against 5 Canaanite city-states, including Sodom and Gomorrah, after 12 years of tribute collapse into rebellion. The coalition marches west, plunders Sodom, and captures Abraham's nephew, Lot. The historical anchors. Kedorlaomer is an authentically Elamite-sounding name. Kudur means servant, and Lagamar was a known Elamite deity, Arioch of Elasar. Elasar is generally identified with Larsa, a powerful southern Mesopotamian city-state active shortly before Babylon's rise. Tidal of Goyim. Goyim means nations. Some historians have connected this to early Hittite or Gutian tribal groupings in Upper Mesopotamia, though this remains uncertain. Amraphel of Shinar has occasionally been proposed as a reference to Hammurabi of Babylon, but this identification is not well supported chronologically and is rejected by most modern historians. It's included here only as a once popular but largely discredited theory, not a reliable historical parallel. The tactical rescue. Abraham refuses to let the coalition dictate terms in the Levant, launching a night ambush with 318 trained servants, pursuing the coalition north of Damascus, and recovering Lot.
The family stronghold and the distant threat. Following Abraham's victory, Israel's relationship with Mesopotamia splits into two threads, a sacred ancestral reservoir, and a source of distant spiritual antagonism. Part A. Padan-Aram, the cradle of the matriarchs. When securing the future of the covenant line, Abraham and Isaac rejected local Canaanite women, instead treating northern Mesopotamia, called Padan-Aram or Aram Naharaim in Scripture, as an ethnic homeland to draw from. Isaac's proxy quest. Genesis 24. Abraham sends his servant roughly 500 miles back to the Euphrates region, to the city of Nar, where he meets Rebekah at a well. Jacob's 20-year exile. Genesis 28-31. A generation later, Jacob returns to the same family enclave, marrying Leah and Rachel while working under his uncle Laban. The historical context. During this Middle Bronze Age period, northern Mesopotamia was populated by Hurrian and Amorite groups organized as independent, wealthy, agricultural clans rather than a unified empire, consistent with Laban operating as an independent tribal chief rather than a vassal of a distant king. Through Rebekah, Leah, and Rachel, 3 of Israel's 4 matriarchs, and 11 of the 12 tribal patriarchs, trace their origin to Mesopotamian soil. Part B. Balaam of the Euphrates. Centuries later, during the Exodus, Mesopotamia shifts from family sanctuary to a source of distant spiritual conflict. The king of Moab, alarmed by Israel's approach, hires the sorcerer Balaam to curse them. The text, Numbers 22:5 states Balaam was from Pethah, which is by the river Euphrates, and Deuteronomy 23 verse 4 places this city within Aram-Naharaim. The archaeological evidence. In 1967, a plaster wall inscription discovered at Deir Allah, Jordan, referenced Balaam, son of Beer, as a known regional seer, lending independent, extra-biblical support to his historical existence. Pethah is generally identified with Pitru, a northern Mesopotamian city near the Euphrates.
The first oppressor, the climax of Cushan-Rishathaim. The pre-Assyrian era reaches its climax in the Book of Judges. Following Joshua's death, Israel falls into idolatry, and its first conqueror emerges from the northeastern river valleys. The biblical tyrant, Judges 3 verses 7 to 11, therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim king of Mesopotamia, Aram-Naharaim, and the children of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. Decoding the name, his title is often rendered Cushan of double wickedness. The Cushan element connects to northern Mesopotamian territories that carried the cultural and ethnic footprint of Nimrod's earlier Cushite-linked expansion, Genesis 10 verses 8 to 11. The historical context, this invasion aligns with the broader instability of the Late Bronze Age collapse, circa 1200 BCE, when the Mitanni kingdom in northern Mesopotamia fractured, creating a power vacuum that local warlords exploited to raid westward into Canaan. He is eventually defeated by Israel's first judge, Othniel, securing 40 years of peace.
Conclusion: the awakening of the Leviathans. For the first several centuries of biblical history, Mesopotamia was not Israel's ultimate destroyer, but its volatile backdrop, the land of architectural wonders, Babel, ancestral origins, Ur and Haran, bold military resistance, Kedorlaomer, and early tribal tyranny, Cushan-Rishathaim. This fragmented landscape of competing city-states and independent warlords was not to last. Centuries later, in the era of the Israelite kings, this fractured region would harden, and the war machines of Assyria, the golden tyranny of Babylon, and the sweeping administration of Persia would awaken, transforming Israel's relationship with the land between the rivers from a series of border clashes into a struggle for survival.